Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to CDC. Welcome to Atlanta. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us this morning. We really appreciate it, and we want it to be a terrific day. We know it will be, and we ask you one thing. Be sure to ask every question you want to ask. We want this to be an interactive, fun, informative day, and the more you know us, the more you know what CDC does, I think the more you understand why we are important to what you do in your life, in your business, in your community. Governor Deal was to have been with us to issue the opening remarks this morning. He couldn't be, but he did send a letter which he asked me to read to you. I was just with the governor last week on an initiative to deal with a big problem here in Georgia and around the country, and he really is proud of the partnership that we have here in Georgia. So from Governor Deal, he sends his remarks. He says it's an honor and a privilege to welcome you to our state and to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for the Atlanta Summit on Public Health and Prosperity. He apologizes for not being here in person. The state continues to be under a state of emergency declaration related to the winter storm, which demands his continued response. He thanks you for attending this important summit and recognizes and emphasizes the importance of CDC to the nation's public health and prosperity. The governor says we are especially thankful for CDC's presence in Atlanta, Georgia, which highlights these vital issues on a global level. The governor says my special thanks to Michael Milken for his leadership in establishing this program. As you'll be reminded today, CDC serves as our nation's 24/7 first line of defense against many known and unknown health threats. CDC is the recognized authority in the world on health issues. I know you join me in congratulating them on that reputation and share my desire that we ensure the agency continues as a leader in public health issues. Again, the governor says, I'm proud of the fact that CDC is located in our state, and I pledge to do all I can to continue to ensure it remains the world leader in this important area of public health. I hope your time with us is very informative and productive. Signed, Nathan Deal, Governor. And I'm sure it will be very productive and informative. And just to kick us off for a minute, I want to do a quick quiz or show of hands. How many people here think that the world today is safer from infectious disease threats than we were one generation ago? I'm going to ask how many think safer, how many think less safe. So first, show of hands, how many in this room think we're safer than we were a generation ago? Please raise your hands. And how many think less safe? So it was probably 65, 35, 60, 40 on the safer. Let's think about that question throughout the morning and throughout the day. I first want to talk to you about 3 threats that make our world, in some ways, at greater risk than we have ever been before. These are emerging infections, resistant infections, and intentional infections. So to take them one at a time, emerging infections. We have MERS coronavirus. We have H7N9 influenza. H7N9 influenza, more than 100 cases this year. Kills a high proportion of the people it infects, spreads easily from poultry to people. Happy Lunar New Year. There are 3.6 billion trips in China. Many of people traveling from endemic places with lots of this virus to others. It is not yet spreading person to person, but even in a good flu year, we lose thousands of Americans to flu. We have hundreds of thousands of hospitalizations, and we lose billions of dollars in productivity from influenza. So emerging infections are emerging at a rate of about 1 per year. Every year, a new one is discovered on average. And we are starting an investigation at CDC on average every day of something that might be the next SARS or MERS or H7N9 or HIV. So emerging infections are with us, and I know that many of you have worked on this, are aware of it, and understand that they remain a constant threat, and we can't predict where they will come from. We never thought that a new flu pandemic, H1N1 pandemic, would come from Mexico, but it did. We were looking here, it came from there. So if there's a blind spot anywhere in the world, we're all at greater risk. The second real risk is resistant infections. You know, we talk about the pre-antibiotic era and the antibiotic era. If we're not careful, we will be in a post-antibiotic era where we don't have any drugs to treat people with deadly infections. And that hits me particularly hard because I did my training in New York City in the 80s and 90s when I took care of hundreds and hundreds of patients who died from HIV infection, AIDS, and I could do very, very little for them. And as a person who worked on tuberculosis control for 10 or 15 years and worked with patients who had very drug-resistant organisms and in some cases untreatable organisms, the idea as an infectious disease physician myself that we would have an infection that we can't treat is just intolerable. And yet that's where we're heading. You will hear about CRE today, carbapenem-resistant Enterobacteriaceae. This is a nightmare bacteria. It's a bacteria that's resistant to all antibiotics, spreads in hospitals, spreads from one strain to another strain. So for those of you who know these terms, from Klebsiella to Pseudomonas to E. coli to Serratia, now 10% of the Klebsiella in our country is resistant. This is a real problem. But the good news is we can stop it. It's not too late. So we have emerging and resistant, but we also have intentional. We know that anthrax was spread intentionally in the Amerithrax episode. That was over a decade ago. It's terrific that we have new technologies that allow us to sequence genomes. You'll hear more about that during the day, that allow us to do really some synthetic biology. But inevitably, that also means that it's gotten easier and cheaper to create dangerous organisms if a group or even an individual is malicious. Imagine the Unabomber in bioweapons. Very, very concerning areas. So against these three threats, we also have a context, and the context is globalization. We are so closely interconnected by the world that we live in today. The fruits and vegetables that we eat, the fish that we consume, the medications that we take and prescribe. Also, the travel that happens today. Sometimes when there's not snowstorms, it travels a little more smooth than it was for the last couple of days. But on any given day, we have an enormous migration around the world. And a virus or infection anywhere in the world is a risk anywhere else in the world within 24 hours. So these three threats are in the context of a globalized world. And the reason, so from all those you might say, yeah, we're less safe, and maybe we are. But we have three things going for us. One of them is that we have commitment. We have commitment of individuals, of companies, of governments. When the SARS outbreak hit a decade ago, it cost the world $30 billion in just a matter of months. And most of that money was lost not because of effective measures to stop SARS. Most of that money was lost because there weren't effective measures applied. Countries around the world, businesses around the world paid attention. Said, we can't afford this again. And the World Health Organization has a new process called the International Health Regulations, or IHRs. These require every country to find and report and stop threats promptly. And we're seeing successes from that. So the first is that we really have commitment. The second, as many of you know much better than I do, we have amazing new technologies. When I started at CDC in 1990, it took a room about a third of the size of this room and 3 or 4 months to sequence a small part of a genome of a microbe and then try to figure out, literally eyeballing it, whether organisms were related to each other. Now we can do that in 3 hours. Previously, getting information absorbed, analyzed, was much more challenging. We have unique opportunities with the genomic revolution, not only in human genomics, but in microbial genomics. We have communications technologies. So technology is in our favor here because it brings the world closer together and it makes us more able to track things. And the third thing that we have going in our favor is success. We have areas where we're really making a difference. Now, H7N9 is a huge threat, but think about what happened. China found it very promptly when it came out. We had been working with them for a decade to help them learn how to sequence the genome, how to report that, how to analyze that. And so they uploaded that information. Within hours of finding the organism, we downloaded it, and we were able to then begin making a vaccine and a diagnostic test, which is now out and in use around the country and around the world. So success breeds success, and there are basically three things that we need to do. We need to figure out how to find things faster, how to respond more effectively or stop them sooner, and how to prevent them more effectively. Those are the three core things that we do at CDC when we work 24/7 to protect Americans from threats, whether they're from this country or abroad, whether they're intentional, man-made, or naturally occurring, whether they're infectious disease or chronic diseases like prescription drug overdose and heart attack and stroke that are the leading causes of death, disability, and of decreased productivity. So I'm delighted that you're here. I think you'll see that CDC is that thin line between the threats out there and our ability to live long, productive, healthy lives. And this event, which is truly unprecedented, I think will help us to strengthen that thin line. Senator Isaacson was with us last night at dinner, and he always says, as he did last night, that CDC is America's best kept secret. And with Michael Milken's help and all of your involvement, today is going to help end that secret, because we want it to be known and we want it to be collaborative. So thank you all very much for coming to CDC. Now, for four decades, Michael Milken has been a leader in health. He's been described as the man who changed medicine. He is chair of the Milken Institute. Many of you may have had the privilege of going to the global conference in the spring in Los Angeles, 3,500 people from more than 50 countries, a unique conference that gets people together in the way that adjacencies lead to productivity, lead to creativity in a way that really Michael Milken only can do. And he's brought that same spirit of collaboration, of enterprise, of productivity, of creativity here to CDC. So thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you, Tom. And I want to just underline one of the things that Tom said today, and that is really this is a chance to see the world through the CDC's eyes and through many other individuals' eyes, and please make the most effective use of the next 7 or so hours. Those organizations, those countries that are the leaders in bioscience and public health are the leaders in the world. And we recognize this with our efforts really focused 20 years ago in this, what we call the March of Progress. It started in 1995 when we were focused on creating a summit, the first ever National Cancer Summit. It eventually led to the march in 1998, 500,000 people in Washington and around the country, really culminating the efforts of thousands of people in government and other areas to double the National Institute of Health budget, National Science Foundation, increase the CDC. It led to what has been an incremental $200 billion investment by the United States people in the biosciences. It led to eventually, through Faster Cures, a Partnering for Cures effort. We're bringing all focus groups in this area, patients, disease-specific organizations, academic research centers, for-profit, pharma, bio, together as a team. It led to an effort in 2011 in Lake Tahoe where we try to see how can we innovate? How can we innovate innovation in the sciences? Led in 2012 to the Celebration of Science. This is a continuing effort of that Celebration of Science, and led here in 2014 to the Atlanta Summit on Public Health. We cannot refocus your attention enough on the fact that more than 50% of all economic growth in the last 2 centuries can be traced to advances in health. The extension of life, the number one measure, and not only the extension of life, the doubling of life expectancy on the planet in 100 years, but the increase in quality of life. The U.S. did even better. And as we look back at it, we see that the United States increased life expectancy by more than 50%. What caused this increase to occur? Improved sanitation, development of antibiotics, progress against heart disease, investment in bioscience research. Today, you're at the 911 center for the world. That is what the CDC is. When there's a problem or a risk someplace in the world, these phones light up and things all over this campus. The CDC put out a list of 10 winnable battle progress report. Many of them you can see there's been enormous progress, whether it was HIV/AIDS, global immunization, food safety. I just want to highlight mother-to-child transmission of HIV and other diseases. And when we step back and think about what's occurred since Oprah Winfrey told us in 1987 that 20% of the American public was going to die from AIDS by 1990. We can look today in America, there's 1 million Americans living with HIV. 50,000 people are affected every year. More than 635,000 Americans have passed away. But in many ways, it has become a manageable disease. Over 2/3 of the 35 million people living with HIV worldwide are in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, and the advances in this area, particularly the advances in the probability that a woman has greater than a 90% chance of not passing HIV onto her children, and understanding that 2/3 of the people with HIV are in sub-Saharan Africa, understanding this, that public health advances, then it's easy to understand that 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa. All this progress, all this success. But in the United States, we've had a challenge, a major challenge, and that is the decrease in funding for biomedical research and the decrease in funding of the budgets here of the CDC. And so whereas China, India, Japan, Brazil, and many of the other countries have decided this is their growth path, this is where they're going to increase funding. In the United States, we've actually reduced funding on an absolute basis and adjusted for inflation, substantially reduced funding. That is why we've held these series of events underlying the celebration of science, to try to remind our country that our role in the world, where we stand, is heavily related to this area. One of our goals today continues to be to demonstrate to you and to the world the future potential for returns on investment in the bioscience. To bring together bipartisan groups. Here you see the leader in the Senate and the leader in the House. Last night we had a Republican senator. We'll have Democratic congressman join us today. 3, to validate the career choices that more than 10,000 people that work for the CDC, letting them know that they made the right decision. Their decision to work in this field. Okay, their career choices. This is a group of young scientists at the Kennedy Center. Next, increase the awareness and understanding of the missions of the CDC, which is why we're here today. And lastly, to share the important message of public health to America's relationship with the rest of the world. The advances in public health and science from the United States have done more for the world than all the foreign aid, all the military assistance we have provided. And so that is one of the messages we want to leave with you today. What role the United States is going to play in the 21st century is going to be determined by our commitments to the Centers for Disease Control and other organizations. And with that, in closing, before we start the next session, we prepared a short video just reminding you of how far we've come in public health. Thank you very much.
Throughout history, diseases have devastated entire civilizations. In the 14th century, 1/3 of the population of Europe, nearly 25 million people,
died from the Black Plague. Smallpox killed an estimated 400 million people
worldwide in the 20th century. And tens of millions of people throughout the world have died from cholera. As a result of these epidemics, worldwide life expectancy was
grim. A baby born in 1800 could only expect to live an average of 26 years, and that number only rose to 31 years by 1900. The United States was not immune.
1 in 5 children born in America in 1900 died before the age of 5.
And the Spanish influenza of 1918 killed more than 600,000 Americans in a single year.
But the combination of improved sanitation and the discovery of more than 24 life-saving vaccines and the widespread use of antibiotics
drastically reduced the rate of infectious diseases and resulted in a sharp drop in infant mortality. Other significant medical advances of the 20th century include the discovery of insulin to manage diabetes,
the use of radiation and chemotherapy to treat cancer, the advent of the kidney dialysis machine, and the introduction of the cardiac pacemaker.
By 1950, life expectancy jumped to 49 years, allowing people around the world
to lead more productive lives. James Watson and Francis Crick's discovery of the chemical structure of DNA in 1953
eventually led to a greater understanding of Alzheimer's, cancer, diabetes, Parkinson's, and many other debilitating diseases. Less than 40 years later, thousands of scientists from around the world
joined forces on the groundbreaking Human Genome Project, financed by the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Energy, and the Wellcome Trust of London. This 13-year, $3.8 billion project has already started to revolutionize
the way we diagnose, treat, and eventually prevent more than 4,000 genetic diseases that afflict people across the globe. The economic benefits have been equally astounding. The Human Genome Project
created thousands of jobs and generated an economic impact far exceeding the original investment. Bioscience investments also hold the promise
of helping solve the most significant global issues of the 21st century, including access to clean water, food production, defense against bioterrorism, energy supplies, and environmental sustainability.
Investments in science have saved millions of lives and have had a profound effect on our quality of life. Worldwide life expectancy is now 67 years.
While in America, it's near 80, giving people everywhere the invaluable gift of more time with loved ones.
We have witnessed remarkable achievements over the past century.
But the potential for innovation is now greater than ever.
The American people have made major investments that have brought us this far.
We cannot afford to put the brakes on this engine of progress.
Now is the time.
Now is the time.
Now is the time.
Now is the time to renew our commitment to bioscience.